Hello. A few weeks ago I worked on this. It's a Philips VR2324 portable V2000 format video recorder, and we got it working reasonably well. But now we have a VR2324. So whilst this is a portable and this is a sort of home machine, actually they are very similar inside. So hopefully that will help me to repair the other machine. And you may have seen me test this one a few days ago, and it's more or less dead. It worked for a few seconds and then shut down. So we seem to have a power supply fault. I don't have the schematics for this machine. I only have partial schematics which describe the differences between this and a model 2340, which has a few extra features. But it doesn't cover the bits that are common, including the power supply. So I'm a little bit without proper information, but let's see if the VR2324 is similar enough that it can help us fix this machine. Right, let's get stuck in. So here's our VR2324. I'd already removed some screws because I had to change the mains filter capacitor before we started. These things explode. So that's been done. And when we left this a few days ago, it did a sort of power-up shuffle, and then the display went out and it didn't do any more. So we'll just try it again and see if it's completely dead or if it'll do a little bit of activity first. So power up now. Completely dead, it appears. And you may have seen at the end of the last video I did check the 5 fuses in here. So let's see what we can find out. The power supply and various other functions are carried out on this board here, which is equivalent to the tuner timer part of the portable, and then the main deck here is equivalent to the portable video recorder part. What I don't know is if there's any extent to which the whole panels might be interchangeable between them. Perhaps what we can do is see if we have the schematic for the VR2324 portable's power supply and see if we can work out from that what the voltages are in here. Well, I'm struggling a bit trying to find schematics, so I thought I'll have a look inside the VR2120 tuner timer unit that goes with the VR2324 machine. So here's the inside of that one. I've worked on this before, and though it's very similar, if we look carefully we'll see that they are not interchangeable. The connectors around this cable here are totally different, they're oriented differently. This one, when we check the fuses, there's 5 fuses along the front, and this one we have fuses at the back here. So unfortunately we're not going to be able to glean a great deal from this, I suspect. The layout is too different. So as it says here, this manual that we do have only covers the difference between the 2324, which is the model we have, and the 2340, which is an upgraded version with stereo sound and remote control and possibly some other detail changes. So it says we need the manual for the 2340 for the full schematics, and we don't have that and can't seem to find it anywhere. So what I don't have is the power supply layout or diagrams, which is what we really need. It says we do have a wiring diagram though, so will that give us any information? The only information we do seem to have is what the supply voltages should be, but it doesn't tell us what pins they come out on. And then we have wiring diagrams that give you all the pin outs but don't give you the voltages. Right, I'm going to assume here of these fuses, there's 4 in a row plus 1 out at the end. I'm going to assume the end one is probably mains input, so let's just confirm that. Though given that the mains actually seems to go straight into the transformer, that may not be true. It may be transformer output. I don't know. I'm going to see if any of these fuses contain any DC voltages. It'll just give me a little bit of information relative to this ground here. Okay, so it's powered up. I'll look at the fuses. Nothing. 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 Pretty much nothing. There may be AC voltages on those. I'm going to set my multimeter to AC volts and see if I can measure anything there. Oh, now I'm measuring something. 17 volts AC. 17 volts AC. This is all relative to ground, which is probably not what they're supposed to be measured against. 11. 11. So, okay, they're on the output of the transformer. So, that tells us a little bit of the circuit is alive. I'm just going to see if I can get to any DC voltages on this front panel. I'm going to say look for a few volts, see if there's anything on some of these ICs. Looking, for example, here we have an LM339, and I see that pin 3 should be the VCC of that one. So let's see if we can measure anything on pin 3. I'll set myself up before I power it up. I don't want to make any short outs. And we have 5 volts. So our problem does not appear to be, possibly not power supply related. Let me have a quick look at this backup battery, because if that's causing problems it might stop the system from running. That's about 0.6 of a volt on it. Looking here, we have an SAA 1060, that's a display driver chip. VCC is pin 6, let's have a look at that. Power it up. 5 volts. I'm glad we didn't get too involved in the power supply, because it doesn't look like a power supply fault. Looking at the 8-bit microcontroller here, supply should be on pin 28 up here. Let's just check we have supply. Yes. Let's see here if we have anything on the crystal. I'm not sure the meter will be able to read that, but we'll give it a go. 5 megahertz. So it is somewhat surprising with so much of this working. You know, we have 5 megahertz on the processor, we have what appear to be the correct voltages on this front panel, that nothing is sort of alive. How odd. I am slightly tempted to change this battery because I know that they can cause problems, and it might be that that is preventing the unit from booting properly. So I think we'll go ahead and change that with something and see where we are at the end of it. So what I've done is disconnected one connector from the front panel and then one connector from the main board there, and I think I can take this completely off, and then we can get this out and change that battery. I don't have one of exactly the same type, I don't believe, but let's see what I can do. Well, I surprised myself. I actually do have an original proper battery of that type, but it's been stripped out from a bigger pack, so I need to solder on a connector for the back, but it actually appears to have a voltage on it. So 220 millivolts or so, so that's not a short circuit. The alternative would have been to fit this one, which is a newer sort of device, but then I have to solder wires on both ends. It's a little bit hard, so I think I'll do this one. Okay, it would have been nice to have been able to weld contacts on there, but that's soldered on with some flux, and that's actually quite a strong connection. That's not going to fail, and I didn't have to overheat the battery and cause any damage to it, so I can now fit that in there. I think actually before I do that, I'm going to very gently charge this battery up a little bit. Right, I've got that on a power supply. I'm going to charge that at about 50 milliamps for a little bit, so that it gets up to at least around about a volt before I fit it on that board. In the meantime, I can get this one off. Okay, with our replacement battery, we're getting a terminal voltage of something over a volt after a little bit of charging, and I've just tried to charge the one that came off the board, but I think we're getting nothing much. What do we get on that one? It says 200 millivolts, but actually I think it's even less than that when I had it on the power supply. So I think that one's knackered, and hopefully this one's in better condition and will possibly allow the board to boot properly. Let's give it a shot. So I'll check the voltage we now have down on the board to make sure everything's connected up properly. Should be around about a volt. Yeah, well, 0.7, 0.8 volts. Okay, so hopefully now it will be able to charge that battery, and that will at least be eliminated. Let's reassemble it. And you might say, well, why did I have such a component in stock? It's because years ago I used to fix TVs and videos a little bit, and TVs such as I think the K30 and others used to use backup batteries or sets of backup batteries like these. So I kept them in stock for those occasions. Okay, do you think it'll be any better? I don't, but you know, it's worth a try, isn't it? Here goes. Exactly the same. It's what I expected. You know, it almost feels like a reset line isn't working, doesn't it? Like it's stuck in reset, perhaps? I don't know, because that wouldn't tie up with the fact that when I first switched it on, the very first time, it seemed to try to work. Let's see if we can see which is the reset pin. Pin 13 of that processor we were looking at earlier. Right next to the crystal, right next to the battery. Let's see what voltage we have on that. Went up to 4 volts. Is that a bit low? I would have thought that should go up to 5. Okay, let's look at the circuit around the reset pin. By the way, I'm looking at this. I wonder if I could add the remote control feature later, if I get it working. Do I have the schematics for this part? No, I don't appear to have schematics for that part, so I'm going to have to just work it out for myself. The reset signal doesn't start on this board, it comes in on this cable, which goes to the main board underneath. And if I look at the reset pin on that chip, there's another similar component down here, and I believe that their reset lines are common. Yes, and probably several other parts as well. I bet this one's common as well. Right, so that's a common reset line, and it comes from this board, not the front panel one. So let's put the front panel back together and see if we can work out where the... of course it's on the PCB for which we don't have diagrams. Marvellous. I'm going to have to work out where the reset signal comes from. So this pin here is reset, I believe, and it goes out to that same connector. So where does that signal come from? Oh, how useful a schematic would be at this point. So what I've just confirmed is that the pin here, which is the third one along here, is that reset pin, and it appears to go nowhere else on this lower board. So it's not derived from this board, it's derived from here or looped through from somewhere else. Okay, it's only a single-sided board, so it's not coming from some other route. So we need to trace out where that reset signal comes from, not here. I'll put this bit back together again. So we know that this is the reset signal here, and it keeps appearing on the reset pins of various ICs, and on some of the others as well, I suspect. Does it come from this connector? No. So it must be on this board. I just need to find where that signal is generated. We mentioned this LM339 earlier. Pin 2 of that is an output, and that output seems to be our reset signal. Aha! So it's got a comparator on pins 6 and 7 that must be associated with generating the reset signal. There's a 6.8 microfarad capacitor on that circuit. I can't fathom it out because there's lots of inputs and connected to outputs, so I don't understand the circuit. But the capacitor is reading 7.4 microfarads, so that is not the cause. Could be the IC itself, but that's fairly unlikely. I really now need the schematics. So I'm beginning to seriously doubt that reset is the problem, because having seen the convoluted circuit that generates it, I think probably 4 volts isn't out of the question for a high signal for it. So why does nothing seem to work? It could be terminal, it could be we've lost a chip we can't replace, but let's just power it up one more time. Well, I've just reassembled it, and well, what can we say? It's sprung into life. Isn't that strange? Well, insofar as the clock's flashing, let's see if anything happens when I press eject. Cass, it says. Well, yes, it does need a cassette. Let me put one in then. On-off button not doing much. Isn't that odd how it suddenly sort of sprung into life? I've done nothing but just put some screws back in. Maybe it's because it charged the battery a bit? Unlikely. Nothing else going on though. Clock set, I could do that. Don't know how to set the clock. Of course, being Philips, it's bound to be hard. Oh, it wasn't that hard. I can't seem to get it out of that clock set mode. Might be asking me for the day. Right, I've set the time to 23:24 because, of course, that's the model. But the on-off doesn't seem to be working. Except when I press eject, it does switch on. Displays 0 in, I think that's a program number. And tells me that we don't have a cassette, and then switches off again. So the on button doesn't seem to be working. If I press play, presumably it'll do the same, yes. Okay. So what should happen when I press eject, I think, is it should open. So whatever button I press, it'll come up with CAS and then time out. Which would be fine, but for the fact the eject should do something. Oh, the record light makes the record LED light up. I'd say everything's behaving properly except lack of eject. And the on-off button. What happens if I power cycle it now? Will it come back up again? You've off a few seconds and on. We just want eject to work. Let's just check a few connections, I think. You know, I've already proven that there isn't a fault with the eject switch itself, because it does cause the machine to switch on. So the fault doesn't lie in that front panel area. It's somewhere else, possibly the machine, you know, the mechanism here, which is harder to work on. But you would have expected it to make a noise, and it sort of stopped. It's a slightly odd thing also that the power button doesn't work. I don't know why that is. I think I'll check that actually. I'll have a look and just make sure that button itself is okay. Yeah, the power button, rather unhelpfully, seems to be on a separate PCB. That's going to be a bit awkward to get to. Yeah, these controls here go onto some separate PCB. And that. So we need to get to that. Okay, I've got that out. So this is the the switch we're not seeing any response from. Switch itself is working, so let's trace it through a little bit. And it just goes to remind us all that Philips mastered the fine art of never using a screw where you could use a fragile plastic clip instead. So the power switch just goes onto the same matrix as all the other keys, and they do work. So it's not working for some obscure reason, nothing to do with the switch itself. I'll just resolder it to be sure, but no, it's further into the machine. So we're going to have to solve the deck problems, I think, before we can make any more progress. Alright, let's just confirm it's still the same. Power was out for too long for the battery. I seem to be having some trouble setting the clock now. I've jammed up a button, I think, somewhere. Oh dear, take it apart again. Okay, hopefully all the buttons will work. Try again. I still can't set the clock. Oh. So I appear to have messed something up on the clock setting, which is unfortunate, because the worry is that if you can't scan all the keys properly, it could cause weird faults. Look, I just pressed number 2 and it went to channel 2. So those buttons are working. At least some of the time. Oh yes, slowly. So, do you think I've actually broken something, or do you think it's just being weird? this is on a separate key scan to these, so I'm probably just going to park that problem and try to work out why the deck isn't running. Okay, I'll stop there for the day and come back to this. Maybe in the meantime I might be able to get the diagrams for it. Now, I know a few other people who are in similar businesses to me do watch my channel, so can I just run this past you? What would you do in this case? I had a customer say he had a really urgent job. He needed a mini DV tape digitizing urgently next day because he was flying somewhere and it was needed for some work or other. So he sent it to me and I said, okay, I'll do it urgently, ran it straight away and started uploading DV AVI file as soon as it was ready. That's full quality lossless DV, so that he could edit that with suitable editing software and keep the full original quality. I did that straight away to save time and I said, here's a bill, if you don't want the tape back, it's only £15, here's my bank transfer details, just pay the £15, job done. He said, oh, I'm just on the way somewhere and I'll do that in a couple of days, or I'll get somebody else in the business to do that in a couple of days. Not ideal. I have done the work. A few days pass. Nothing. Email him. Don't forget to pay. Nothing. Email him again about a week later. No reply. And again a few weeks later. Nothing. Several weeks have gone by. Lost all contact. So this makes me lose faith, in people, their honesty. I've been good enough to get ahead and make sure that the data was done straight away, so it was in time for his urgent job. And now he's completely ignoring me because he's got what he needed and he can run away and ignore me. So does that mean I never do a job ahead of payment again? Does that mean that I'd never take that risk again? What would you do? It's £15, just write it off. Okay, yes, but it's our livelihood and it's wrong that people deliberately scam me when I've tried to be helpful and honest and do something for someone, and then they just run off. And it's not the first time it's happened. I have to write off a certain amount of money each year to people who don't pay their bills. And I've had a few occasions where I've had somebody sent me a cheque, and I'd in the days of checks, and the cheques bounced, and they've never corrected that either. I had a case where I did work for a business, and it was in two parts. I did the first part and they paid. I billed them the second part and they'd gone bust. So I never got the money for that either, or not all of it. Well, that's one of those things that happens, but deliberately not paying like this, it makes me rather cross. So you tell me what you'd do. Anyhow, we will come back to this VR2324 in due course, so please do come by and watch me do that and work on other audio video equipment as well. Bye for now.